Bridget, I really wanted to sort of do a mini interview with you as the former Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court, somebody who has put a lot of thought and action into expanding access to court services to individuals, and talk about what opportunities generative AI creates for filings in courts and for people to ask to have their disputes handled in court. So maybe we could start by sort of asking what it is about generative AI that could lead to more lawsuits and why you think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, you're putting words in my mouth. I think not the ability for more people with non-frivolous lawsuits to be able to get relief for those wrongs is a good thing. I think the more disputes, valid disputes that we can resolve, leads to uh, stronger communities, more confidence in the rule of law. So I'm in favor of any way we can figure out how to resolve disputes that need to be resolved, and there are many right now that don't get resolved. And this is actually something I did think a lot about in many different contexts. But one that always bothered me, and I tried a couple things to try and penetrate it, was personal injury cases where there was no dispute about liability. So, really, just kind of a concession around liability. But if damages were under a certain dollar amount, um, there was really no market for lawyers to bring those claims. And they're too complicated for people to bring on their own. It's really, they're the filing requirements and the process requirements for filing a civil lawsuit, even a civil lawsuit, that's where you're only alleging $50,000 worth of damages, and only I say just for the purpose of this discussion. Obviously, $50,000 for a lot of people might be the difference between like staying in your home or not, or you know, sending your kids to school or feeding your family. So it's a significant amount of money to many, many Americans, and yet um, the market for legal services right now has no place for those cases to go. It just isn't. There isn't a way for lawyers who file cases on behalf of people who've been harmed, individuals, small businesses, frankly, there are, business torts. But lawyers can't file those cases because the cost of litigation makes it impossible to make the bottom line make sense. And I heard that repeatedly from the lawyers who do that. There's this one innovation in maybe it's in other states as well, but I know it pretty well in South Carolina of all places. They have this innovation called summary jury trials, and basically the plaintiff's bar and the defense bar agreed that they should have a way to resolve those cases that just like don't make any sense to litigate in a formal court process, because by the time you get through the discovery, there's no money left for the person who was injured or harmed, and even the lawyer is, like, out, on both sides, like, it's just costing everybody too much money to get to a result. So they have this process called summary jury trials, and they're basically it's a private process that the bar has agreed to. They use a courtroom, and they use the jury pool that's been called to the court. But they have a one-day trial. They have, like, a limit on, like, the number of minutes the plaintiff can use and the number of minutes the defendant can use. They have a high-low agreement at the beginning of the case. Like, it's like, this case is either worth 25 grand or 75 grand, and the jury is really only deciding between those 2 numbers. They have, like, a lawyer who plays a judge, wears a robe, like, and they have this, like, basically, summary jury trial process, and, the people involved get to have their day in court. They get to, like, tell their story, say what happened to them, and the jury makes a decision. The jury, I mean, they're not really a jury, but they're kind of a jury, and it works incredibly well, and it works because there's, like, basically just, like, smart lawyers, decided to solve a problem, and they did. I actually my husband actually wrote up, like, an academic paper about it once. He, like, went down and, like, watched them for, like, a month and wrote it's, like, a very cool paper that he wrote about it. I tried that in Michigan, like, it never took off. I felt like the lawyers on both sides, like, felt like something was up, and they couldn't trust it. I kept thinking like, well, how about medium claims courts? Like, what, how about if we just needed like other ways to resolve this like category of cases for which the market couldn't respond. And I think now we might have it. And I think this technology is reducing the barrier to resolution in such a significant way that it's making that category of cases, at least, all of a sudden, have a place to go. I mean, at least, there might still be problems if significantly more cases get filed in courts, and we could talk about that in a minute. But I do think that the barrier to entry, that like startup cost that makes it impossible for lawyers to file a case where nobody disputes that somebody was harmed and somebody's at fault, but the injury is only worth, and I put only in quotes because obviously it's significant to the person who was harmed, $75,000 or $50,000 or $25,000. So I think that's kind of exciting, that part.
Very cool. I've represented my parents pro bono once in a case like this for $15,000, which to them was an enormous sum of money. But to your point, they had been wronged by an insurance company, and nobody's going to take that case. They were lucky to
No.
have an in-house counsel who loves them very much and was willing to. But it was like full blown discovery, going to the
Yeah.
courthouse, having hearings and stuff, and we prevailed. But that is a very unique circumstance, and you add that together in the aggregate. So you've talked about personal injury claims, business torts, some insurance disputes. Are there other categories of cases that fall into this
Yeah,
s
I mean,
window?
honestly, I mean, I probably haven't thought about them all, but I think it's any civil wrong, right? Like any civil wrong where damages are, under a certain dollar amount. I think those cases are just all priced out of the market. I hadn't thought about your example. Like every once in a while, you have a kid who loves you, or you're a lawyer, so you can go figure out how to navigate the process, and it's worth it to you. But for the most part, there is not a way for even lawyers who would like to help, to make that model make sense, given the costs of litigation the way it is now. So,
Yeah. And it's a story for another day, but even as a lawyer, it was an incredibly difficult process trying to figure out how to litigate in a county where I didn't litigate. I mean, it just
yeah,
goes to show you how difficult it is no matter what your training is.
yeah,
Um, But it's funny because we take an optimistic view on this podcast, but I drifted into old lawyerly tendencies in prepping for this podcast, and all of the notes that I had were about the dangers of frivolous lawsuits, and that's
yeah,
what I was thinking about. And as we were prepping, you said this is what you hear about most frequently. And we'll put deep fakes to the side because I know that there are concerns out there about that. But why do you think that the automatic jump for lawyers and judges to this is gonna open up the floodgates to everybody suing one another is misplaced?
yeah. I do hear this from when sometimes when I present to courts, or at least for a while. I mean, I think that the conversation is significantly elevated this year than it was maybe last year or the year before. But there is this worry of like, oh gosh, are we going to just see like thousands and thousands of frivolous lawsuits because these like chatbots can like spit them out, and they'll just automatically file them. And I usually can make most courts feel better because their tech infrastructure is like so low grade that they're like the automatic filing from a chatbot is a far way off. And sadly, even for like innovative like court leaders, when public funding is how you staff your IT team, it's going to be a while, right, before they can sort of take thousands and thousands of filings from bots. I mean, I think these tools are already like pretty good, and you definitely could tell it, I guess, to draft. You'd have to know what to tell it to draft, but you could probably tell it to like draft a demand and maybe, a complaint if you knew that word. Maybe you could ask it to teach you what you would need to do if you wanted to sue somebody, and probably you could do that, and then you could probably tell it to draft that thing. But then figuring out how to file it is like almost impossible. I mean, it's just really like it's really probably not it probably shouldn't be in like the top 30 things we're worrying about. And instead, I think we should be focused on the idea that maybe we can figure out how to resolve these disputes nobody really disagrees need to be resolved when there is. Again, if there's a dispute about whether someone's liable, well, then that's a different category of cases, and obviously we should figure out how to resolve those disputes as well. But for the cases where everybody kind of agrees about who was at fault, but nobody can afford to figure out how to get that harm resolved, this should be good news, right? Because the fact that our legal system can't respond to that right now is causes damage. I mean, it's damaging when you try to explain to someone that even though they were harmed and nobody disputes they were harmed, and nobody disputes who was at fault for them being harmed, we don't have a market that can help them because it's not a you weren't harmed enough because $50,000 of injury isn't like injury the legal system cares about. It's not a great message, right? So I think if we have a way to resolve disputes that are lower dollar disputes but significant to the people who are harmed, that's probably good news. And there are, as you know, now there's like legal tech companies, startups, and actually companies that have been around a little bit longer, but are using this technology now in their business model that are aiming at this sort of segment of the market. So I think we're already seeing some solutions here.
And you have a few examples of those. What are some of the companies that are emerging to tackle this?
Yeah, I've seen like more stories in the last month or so on, and I know there are more than these two, but I've seen like three or four different stories about Even Up on the plaintiff side and Legal Nation on the defense side. And full disclosure, I know the team at Legal Nation, and have and they're very impressive. The Even Up team has raised a considerable amount of funding in the last few months. They're doing basically that front end work that a plaintiff's lawyer has to do to get a case ready to figure out if it's a case they can file, meaning a case where they believe that they can prove someone was liable for harm and that the harm is enough to make the case financially make sense. And there's a lot of like startup work, gathering documents, tracking down the kind of information that a lawyer needs to make that sort of valuation and decision about whether they can make the case make sense. And and Even Up's platform is doing all of that, and it's then putting together these demand packages, and it's giving attorneys who do that work this like brand new tool to kind of assess case values, figure out how to which cases they can put in which process, and they're able to file significantly more cases. I mean, the Even Up reports like settling or collectively claiming more than $1.5 billion in damages for the law firms using their platform, which is significant given that I think they've only been doing this generative AI piece of this work for not too long. So that's pretty interesting. And on Legal Nation is one of again, I'm sure there are others like Even Up on the plaintiff side. So we don't endorse particular companies or whatever, but Legal Nation is one that's been working to they've been using technology long before, not long before, but for a number of years before generative AI to sort of enhance efficiency in litigation generally. I don't know that they only work with defense firms or corporations. I think they work with anybody, frankly, because I think their technology does that. But they now leverage AI to automate a lot of aspects of litigation as well. And so I've seen a number of articles, both Even Up and Legal Nation, talked about. So I think this is a segment of the market that this technology is going to change, and I, for one, think that's mostly good news. I as you know, one of the things I think about all the time, and I'm like constantly trying to figure out solutions for, is I do think we need more effective operating systems now. If these, maybe the parties will be able to actually like work things out, and they won't need courts, and they won't need arbitrators or mediators. But when they do, I do want our operating systems to catch up to the new tools for the buyers and sellers of legal services.
Very cool. And it connects all the way back to our What Just Happened segment of the acceleration and democratization of this technology and all the different cool ways that it can be developed by entrepreneurial minds. And Also seems like, I was thinking about this in another conversation, connecting statutory remedies that the legislature creates with like an actual market where people can take advantage of those remedies or assert their rights.
Yeah,
Right now, the legislature creates remedies and there's nobody who will actually help you execute on them.
right.
So it's a little bit, removed from the average person sort of connection between those 2, but it feels to me like it improves the functioning of different branches of government together as well. Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.